On Friday afternoon, a coach, a basketball coach in the United States, tweeted 7 words. Fight for freedom, stand up with Hong Kong. It didn't really raise much attention first, but then 48 hours later, all hell broke loose. It started with the Chinese Basketball Association, which is headed by Yao Ming, a former player for Houston Rockets, and after that, number of Chinese companies reacted by boycotting, by punishing Houston Rockets, which coach said a statement. Just to mention some of them, Taobao, the biggest retailer in China, cancelled all the goods related to Houston Rockets. Li-Ning, the producer of sports goods, Tencent, number of companies. Now the Chinese consulate in Houston said that they are expecting the correction of the error, and there are thousands and thousands of Twitter accounts which has no followers, which are popping out, insulting and threatening Houston Rockets. I wonder if anybody can tell me, from this panel, what does it tell us about superpower China? What does it tell us about the hysteria that was created by a small statement of a sports coach? What does it tell us about China and Chinese foreign policy? Anybody wants to? Yes.
3 words, I think. Weaponization of business. That's really what we're looking at here. And it's extremely clear. What is really stunning to me is that we don't see it sufficiently. We don't see it clearly. We don't shout about it from the rooftops. We should have been doing this for years. And I think when I struggle a little bit with some of these sort of moral issues about how should one understand China, what is fair, what is unfair, I think a lot of us do. Recently, many of us have been going through a process of rethinking. I often actually go back to, and this little bit I think cuts into a question you wanted to ask about Hong Kong, so I'll be very brief on that. But I go back to the attitudes there, and what I see there in a part of China which is not under the Communist Party, technically has a high degree of autonomy, is almost always a sense of what are you doing in Europe? What are you doing in America? What do you think is going to happen to you? Look at us. So I think that honestly, the Houston Rockets thing is a fantastic case of showing the risks of doing business with, a political animal like that.
Peter?
So I think there are three things to take away, at least, that come to mind when you ask the question. The first is a reminder of what Mikhail said on the first panel, that no one and nothing is immune to politics, in the party's politics, that if you were going to engage in China, you were going to be engaged in political behavior. Even if it seems like it's cultural, educational, what have you. Second, it illustrates the party's concept of sovereignty and how they interpret sovereignty, and that it's not simply China's borders, but it's any discussion of China. So the Rockets general manager mentioned Hong Kong. Prague's mayor was willing to talk about Taiwan. And at some point, someone in here, I think Didi just managed to violate China's sovereignty. So by talking about what the party is willing to do, even though the party claims it doesn't interfere in domestic affairs, it would claim that countering that statement would be a violation of their sovereignty. That's another piece of it, which leads to a third point, is that the ideas that the party propagates are a national interest, if you will. Or to flip that around, that ideas are a threat to the party and it reacts to those ideas as such.
Thank you. Mr. Poeschel, we've heard throughout the whole discussion, throughout the host panels, words like threat, danger. Is China really a threat, and what is your definition of the threat? What is the nature of the threat? How does Czech foreign communists receive that?
Well, I think the perception of China has been changing over time. Before being in this position here in Prague, I spent long 6 years in Brussels in the EU, and before that 3 years at NATO. And I remember those times when in EU Brussels China was received, and I'm rushing to act naively, just as an economic opportunity for Europeans. And if I think back, that was the situation, I would say 2.5 years back, and without any additions to that. It's an opportunity. We must find a way how to engage with China economically. The only interest was to open up the Chinese market, to create or safeguard a level playing field for business between Europe and China. Now, I understand that this was and continues to be very attractive for European, American, Western business on the whole. But with the increasing assertivity of China on the international scene, not only in economic terms, but also in terms of security and penetration, projection of influence and power into other areas, the perception of China has been changing. And I think this applies to the EU as a whole. China remains to be seen as an opportunity, but at the same time, and in the same phrase and sentence, it is considered a challenger and competitor, and all of these, opportunity, competitor, and challenger, in strategic terms. Strategic terms means that China is completely different from the West. China has its own strategy that it uses, and part of the strategy is an element that I think can be applied also on the reaction to the tweet. And China wants the world to play increasingly along the rules China sets. And I think this is the basic problem that we have, because we have been used to being the north setter globally, I mean the West. And now all of a sudden this is no longer fully respected by everyone in China.
Charles, what we've heard, is it a part of like a bigger, like a Chinese long-term plan of the Chinese foreign policy? And what is the aim of the foreign policy of China? What do you think?
It doesn't talk about the long-term plan, but I mean, certainly it depends. I mean, you're talking about China as a threat and China as its long-term strategic goals. It helps to, it depends how you measure it, and it depends where you're sitting. China's foreign policy and China's security projection and security policy compared to other great powers in the world is actually quite cautious. But if you measure China's foreign policy and security policy compared to where it was 10 years ago, there's been an absolute sea change in the amount of assertiveness, the amount of aggressiveness that China's demonstrated. And I think it's probably more useful to consider the latter measure, as where were they 10 years ago when they were taking a very low profile. In fact, their official foreign policy doctrine was hide your lights and bide your time, keep a low profile, while we focus on growing our economy. That era is over now, even if that doctrine still exists. That's still the official doctrine of China. Since Xi Jinping came to power, they've been extremely aggressive about claiming an extraterritorial sphere of influence in the South China Sea. They wouldn't call it an extraterritorial sphere of influence, they would call it a domestic issue, because they interpreting that the territory of the sea as Chinese waters. And that's part of a larger, probably a larger effort to project power into Southeast Asia. So, and then you have, well, we've talked a lot about the Belt and Road in the previous panel, but also I'll stop there. But you know, it's a foreign policy that's grown massively more assertive in a very short time, and it's probably not. They're probably not suddenly going to decide to put it back in the box anytime soon. So if you live in, you know, if you're a South China Sea riparian state, or if you're work for the Houston Rockets or something, you've probably noticed China's new aggressiveness, and this is something that we consider a threat.
To take a quick follow-up on that, I think that if you measure it by sort of the traditional tools of statecraft, you could say that China is cautious. But if you look at it at China's aims and how they're explained, as Martin suggested by looking to the documents, it's a coherent set of incredibly ambitious and far-reaching objectives that have always been on a global scale. There is literally no documentary evidence to suggest that China's ambitions are regional, or that it's regional first and then maybe eventually global. The party has always seen itself on a global stage, and has always acted and thought about itself being on a global stage. If you remember, one of the reasons for the Sino-Soviet split is that a relatively backwards China wanted to contest leadership in the communist world with the Soviet Union about what it meant to be what theory meant and what it meant for policy. And one of the ways you can see that China's policy has been quite aggressive and far-reaching, even without the material power, is first within the party's reach into the political systems of foreign countries, the cultivation of diaspora, and what is called the United Front work, or what was National Front in Czechoslovakia. And the second, in tech expansion, in that the flows of data and information they're attempting to lock those into a Chinese infrastructure so that their AI algorithms are trained on a much larger set of data, that communications are bound through a Chinese system. And that's an incredibly ambitious, far-reaching, and quite invasive goal. This isn't like the telegraph, in a sense. It's not just a communication line, but it's about how national data is mentioned. I believe it was Miguel who mentioned smart cities in the previous panel, about taking this data that we found to be convenient, but then managing it and integrating it into a Chinese system of information.
With regards to this couple of times mentioned Chinese assertiveness or even Chinese aggression, I would like to ask Didier about the situation in Hong Kong, because she is from Hong Kong. And just for a background, I would like to tell you that, in 1997, when the handover happened from Great Britain to Hong Kong, can you talk about these agreements that Hong Kong will, because I'm not sure how many people know that there was an agreement for 50 years. You can imagine the situation and put it into context, and why should people in the Czech Republic, or Germany, or Poland, or anywhere care about what's happening in Hong Kong?
Right. I think, just to do a very brief catch-up, when I was initially introduced, I think I actually omitted to say that I am currently taken up a position as Senior Fellow of the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin, and my last job in China on the journalism side was with the New York Times from 2010 to 2017. So my apologies for overlooking that biography. You got it now. I'm aware how little time we have to say things here that I think are very complex and deserve really deep attention and analysis. And I would also like to preface that everything I say is not directed at Chinese people per se, at the people of China or Hong Kong or Taiwan or the diaspora, but simply at a political system, an economic system, a cultural system in the political sense, and that's what we really need to be looking at here. This isn't personal, it's structural. And so to get onto Hong Kong, I think that what we're seeing in this incredible uprising that's been going on there now again for 4 months is violent, quite violent, is essentially Hong Kong, which was actually never part of the PRC, because remember the PRC was founded in 1949. Now Hong Kong was a British colony at that point, and it was run benevolently, I would say. What's happening now, of course, is that in order to prepare for the handover back to China from Britain, in 1984, something was signed called the Joint Declaration. It's a state treaty that's lodged at the United Nations between Britain and China that guarantees Hong Kong the continuation of its way of life, its legal systems, which are radically different from those of the mainland of China, for 50 years. Now, this 50 years number apparently was dreamt up by Deng Xiaoping, the former leader, when he was very elderly, and he kept changing his mind. One day he'd say, well, maybe 20 years is enough, and another day he'd say, actually, I think maybe we need a bit more, let's give them 40. Somehow they ended up with 50. The point being that it's a sort of a fantasy. It's like an idea plucked from the sky of like total control. We can let them do this for a while, and then we'll just change everything. That's sort of the bottom line. And this number of 50 years has always been looming in people's heads in Hong Kong. And I think that when you see this explosion now, that's why we're seeing such a depth of anger. There's a lot of pent-up frustration and fear above all. Fear of what might come. Because I think what Hong Kong did, in a sense, as a largely Chinese territory made up of people who fled from the PRC, let's not forget that either, was it actually stepped out of Chinese history. Earlier, Olga mentioned culture and the importance of culture as a thing in China, and I think the idea of history is something that repeats itself in China endlessly. You've got these rising cycles of violent dynastic control. The Communist Party is actually very similar in that sense, and if people think I'm being too extreme, I can point you to Chinese thinkers such as Qin Hui, who have written about this extremely interestingly. Inside mainland China, this is a Chinese theory. So, Hong Kong stepped out of that history and it attained a certain freedom and self-actualization for the people there that is quite extraordinary. It's remarkable and it's impressive. And I think that what's happening now, of course, is that China is taking back, and Hong Kong is afraid. Their way of life is deeply under threat. The fight now is the fight that we see is that pushback against this sort of terrible sense of inevitability that people are afraid they're going to lose their sense of security, their sense of the security of their bodies, of being able to not go to jail for something that they didn't do, the future for their children. I mean, this is really existential, what's going on there now, and I think that it's highly relevant to the rest of us, because I think that one could perhaps make the argument that Hong Kong is, of course, a sovereign part of China. I understand that, but I don't think it ends there. And I think that what's happening in Hong Kong is very much a canary in the coal mine. We need to pay attention to the values at stake, to the shifting sort of power structures that have played out in Hong Kong now for a long time. And the fact is that China in 2010 announced that its joint declaration with Britain over the future of Hong Kong was history, is the word it used, i.e. we're going to walk away from our commitments. Now this is an international treaty lodged at the United Nations. That's pretty brassy to do something like that. And I think that in that point there, I see a real sign for us outside of China, if you like, to really learn from what that teaches us and not simply to ignore it and pretend like it's not actually happened or that business is more important, something like that.
Martin, Hong Kong is about 10,000, 11,000 kilometers away. Are there any concern, at the Czech Foreign Ministry about the security situation there and how this may affect the Czech policies, or what issue, what they said, a canary in the coal mine? Are you looking at that similar way or the same way?
Well, we've been following that very closely, I would say, and there are two aspects that are concerned to the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One visit Hong Kong to be safe, so we issue regular advice. But besides that, we also follow the situation on a larger scale and what that can mean politically, both in China and globally. We certainly are not ready or able to take any political positions on what's going on there, except that commitments that are, and it was quite clearly said, launched with the UN, must be honored. Pacta sunt servanda. That's an overall and general principle that upon which the world order is and should be based. And if not, then we have a broader problem. No matter whether we speak about internal affairs of one China, in this case, there is a role for the international community just because of the fact, that the agreement is registered by the UN, and then that means, that there is an overall UN global responsibility for how this works.
Charles, you've been to China for many years. How did you see these changes in Hong Kong, and how did China change? We were talking about how it incredibly changed during the Xi Jinping era. How did you, who lived there until very recently, how did you, as a journalist, experience those changes? What was changing? What was happening in China in your life or in your work as a journalist?
I think this has to be seen as part of a broad crackdown by on civil society and virtually everything else that's happened under Xi. This has been, they have a much harder line on foreign policy. They have a much harder line domestically. What's happened in Hong Kong is simply part of that. They seem to, it appears that they seem to speed up this timetable, to speed up the integration of Hong Kong with the mainland, even if not, this has been agreed and set out in treaty. Now, what's happened in Hong Kong has probably given everybody in Beijing a bit of pause. They probably had not counted on this kind of a reaction. I think at the moment Beijing is confident that the protests will burn out. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's probably good that Beijing is confident and they don't see a need to intervene. But what this does say is, and this also hasn't caused a wave of sit-ins and protests in southern China, a contagion effect. But it has made everybody in China, I think everybody in China knows that this is going on, even if it's all blocked on social media. And what they see is, these are people who go out in the streets and fight because they don't want to deal with the crap that mainlanders deal with every day. They don't want to deal with the system. They don't want to live like that. And I think that's quite it's a real kind of finger in the eye for the regime. And I think they probably underestimated what the reaction of Hong Kong would be to what to this extradition bill that started the whole
I definitely agree that they didn't see this coming. I think also it's important to note here that when people say, well, what actually went wrong? Why is Hong Kong so angry? Of course, the trigger was this change to the law to permit people in Hong Kong to be extradited to places with which Hong Kong has no extradition treaty, one of them notably being the mainland of China. And that was the trigger, but the really important stuff that's underneath it, that's been bubbling since 1997, of course, and before indeed, is the issue of constitutional reform. The promises made explicitly between China and Britain, or by China, if you like, when it took Hong Kong back in 1997, to bring in, to move towards democracy in a gradual, orderly progress was, I believe, the phrase, gradual and orderly progress, not just towards a more democratic system, but specifically towards universal suffrage, to be worked out in detail, of both the leader of Hong Kong and of the entire legislature. So I think that, this foot dragging it began immediately after the handover. In fact, I was there working for the Associated Press at the time when China abolished the last British colonial legislature, which was the most democratic in Hong Kong's history. Not saying very much, perhaps. Brits were not exactly shining light in that area. In their defense, if they had been, China would probably have pulled the plug on the whole situation a long time ago, because China never wanted Hong Kong to be democratic. We know that from the history papers. So basically, they cancelled the last legislature and set their own one up in Shenzhen, just across the border from Hong Kong. And I went along, and it was a complete charade. It was called the provisional legislature, and it was just stacked and whatever. So we then had another election after the handover, and that whole process of becoming more democratic, and of course what that means in reality is being able to shape your future and to shape your life and to shape the lives of your children, or to give them a good life. It's a very concrete thing. It's not just an abstract ideal. It's about daily decisions and outcomes. I don't need to tell people in this room that. That whole process just slowed down, and it was never picked up again. So there are these serial offences, if you like, that have occurred in terms of not coming through on the promises made by China over Hong Kong, and that's really what has been the fuel to this fire that we see now. So it is very specific and provable. And again, I think this issue about the democratic system not granting universal suffrage points to another reason why Hong Kong is important for the world, and that is because simply there is a complete rejection of this kind of life, this way of life, this type of system from the Chinese Communist Party. It's very clear. They don't want it, they don't like it, and they're not going to basically encourage it anywhere or even let it continue somewhere if it's not in their interest and if they are in a position to change it. So I think that's another reason why Hong Kong is very relevant to us today.
In the previous debate, we've heard about the Chinese regime is a Leninist system, Leninist regime. Now we hear a couple of times how in last 10 years, ever since Xi Jinping got to power, China became more assertive, much harder line on foreign policy, much harder line inside of China, with all the surveillance, with all the car damage in Xinjiang and other places. Does it tell us that the Chinese political system is changing? Because I talked to some political analysts in China, Chinese professors, not dissidents, professors from Beijing University, for example, and they said that it's not a party politics anymore, it's a clan politics. He said that China is controlled by 5-6 men. So tell us a little bit about, do you think the Chinese political system has changed and how to understand it today?
Well, I see you want to go with the small questions.
Yeah.
Any history of the Chinese Communist Party that doesn't address the role of families is dismissing a huge piece of the story. The difference is that if you go back about, say, 60 or 70 years, and you say take that first Central Committee meeting after the founding of the People's Republic of China, that's pretty much your core set of families. If you look at what has happened to those families since 1950 or 51, you'll notice that what was maybe 400 or 500 families that governed the PRC and governed the Chinese Communist Party is probably down to about 100, maybe 80 that now govern the PRC. And they've done it to themselves. So in one sense, this is a part of the instability that's in China.